which are of common knowledge. Say, for instance, the example which is given in this particular publication is that the common fact that plants are fertilized by pollen. This kind of statement cannot be copyrighted at the meaning level, but the specific words used to explain them may be subject to copyright. So this is certain nuances of plagiarism that one need to be sensitive about. So therefore, this author, the Vangsgaard, he recommends, so this publication is basically from a set of recommendations which are from the Council of Scientific Editors, that are a series of publications which concludes that the authors must carefully check any information they take from another source, and if there is a doubt, perhaps we have to cite the original source or use that as a direct quote.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest Code Presents webinar, Git Basics, knowledge you need to develop important Git skills.
Perhaps
we're excited to have longtime Code Magazine author Sahil Malik presenting today, and we're looking forward to learning what we need to effectively use Git in our software projects.
Somebody else has created. So
Sahil's presentation today is directly related to his January-February Code Magazine article. I've included a link here if you want to refer to the article during the presentation. My name is Jim Duffy, and I'm responsible for the marketing and sales efforts for all of our code services, including Code Magazine, of course. But Code is so much more than just a magazine.
It does not exist.
Code's continuing mission is to help people build better software. We're a Microsoft partner and provide a number of services under the Code brand umbrella, including build.
It could be plagiarism that occurs when a researcher uses a secondary source of data. For instance, a review article could be cited for describing a discussion point or driving the background of the study. But if we get into the review article in detail, then one identifies that it is not actually appropriate to cite that particular review article. So both these types lead to an increase in the number of reference source related errors, and so sometimes we also find several citations getting mentioned in a particular article, and when we carefully go through all the citations, especially the citation bunches, we may identify at times that some of those citations may not be actually required or may not be appropriate. So this is the source-based plagiarism. The third type of plagiarism is direct or verbatim plagiarism, which occurs when an author copies the text of another author word for word. So either it is somewhat similar to complete plagiarism, but here it is perhaps a part of the complete paper that gets quoted in different parts of the manuscript. Then the other type that is stated is the self-plagiarism. So this is a kind of a very fine line where self-plagiarism begins or it is an appropriate practice. So self-plagiarism is also called as auto-plagiarism or self-duplication, when an author reuses significant proportion of one's previously published work without referring to the previous manuscript or publication. So this type of plagiarism is most likely to involve published researcher rather than university students. So this happens when somebody has many publications, and sometimes it is possible that some of the previous papers again getting verbatim replicated, but most importantly without a referral to the previous source. So because of both the materials being, that is the one which is written later versus the one which is cited, that the one which the same person published earlier has come from the same source, the severity of this self-plagiarism is kind of under debate. And if you look at contemporary approach of the academic journal, many of the journals have strict criteria on the percentage of the author's work that is reusable. So this is where certain rules are set in the contemporary guidelines. The other type of plagiarism is called paraphrasing plagiarism. If you look at some of the studies done by the Wiley publishers, this is quoted as the most common type of plagiarism. It involves the use of someone else's else writing with some minor changes. So here, even if the words are different, the original idea remains the same, and sometimes we will find the sentence construction getting kind of reorganized. So this is one area where we perhaps need to sensitize the students as they get into research and writing manuscripts, because many a time students may not have a good understanding about this kind of paraphrasing plagiarism. There is another type of plagiarism which is called as a mosaic plagiarism, which may be more difficult to detect because it interlays someone else's phrases with his own research. So there could be kind of a patchwork with multiple sources getting intermingled. Though without software, detecting a mosaic plagiarism is difficult. With advent of softwares, this has become immediately detectable. One other plagiarism that we need to keep in mind is accidental or unintended plagiarism. Again, this is a controversial type, which some people agree, some do not agree. There is a view that whether it is unintended or intended, there is no excuse for plagiarism and the consequences should be the same. However, plagiarism may be accidental if it occurred because of neglect, mistake, or unintentional paraphrasing. So many a time, students who may not be aware of certain intricacies related to the plagiarism may commit unintentionally the way in which they represent their ideas may look like plagiarism. And also, inaccurate authorship. It is something which can also lead to plagiarism. In the sense, it's basically something similar to the source-based, but there are subtle differences in which the individual contributes the manuscript, does not credit for it. So, which can happen the opposite way also. So this is another type of plagiarism which is mentioned in the literature. So with these subtypes of plagiarism, before winding up, I thought I will just take us all through what to do if you suspect plagiarism. So this is the COPE guidelines. The first set of algorithm is applicable to a submitted manuscript. So this is what it do. A manuscript is submitted, and many a time the reviewer informs the editor about suspected plagiarism. But these days, what has happened is in several of the editorial processing software, the plagiarism check is inbuilt, so that when the manuscript is submitted and is sent to the editorial review, there is a mention about the percentage of similarity index. So if the similarity index is high, then there are actually ways in which it can be taken further. And say, for instance, the manuscript is carefully reviewed, and if it's clear plagiarism, then the authors will be contacted, and if it is substantial, the manuscript is likely to be rejected. Whereas if the similarity is due to minor copying of short phrases only, the author is informed in a neutral term expressing the concern, and then look at how we can modify it if possible. So on the other hand, if it is redundancy, then there are some specific guidelines which come later. So based on the response of the author, there are several procedures that can be adopted. To the extent it can be taken up to at the level of all the co-authors, or to the level of the institute in which the author is working, and even to some of the professional bodies. So this is one set of guidelines given by COPE. And the other suspected plagiarism may come up in a published manuscript, which the audience, the other peers that read the manuscript after publication may pick up. And here also it is essentially the same kind of flow chart, where instead of the viewer, the reader becomes the person who is contacted by the editor if there is no plagiarism. On the other hand, if the plagiarism is indeed identified, the same steps can be followed. So essentially, I thought I'll give the flowchart because this actually connects the types of plagiarism with the kind of decisions and the kind of grades which the editorial team assesses and ascertains in a particular manuscript and takes it further. So with this, I would stop, and I thank again for the opportunity. I understand there is a presentation which will follow mine, and perhaps later I'm happy to interact and learn through the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Venkat. And I think it's been a great pleasure listening to you, to taking us through the different types of plagiarism and how it has evolved over years. And also kind of guiding us in terms of, how we can actually handle it when, issues like this arise. Professor Pratima Murthy has joined the meeting. Good evening, ma'am, and welcome to this session. We would love to have the opening remarks from you. Dr. Venkat has finished his presentation. So before we go to move on to the second session, I thought if you could just have a few words for us.
Thank you, Geetha, and apologies for having joined late. I listened the last bit to the auto-plagiarism part of what Venkat presented. Plagiarism is a very dicey thing, and it's surprising how each one of us, when we are writing, are sometimes so unaware of the fact that what we are doing might amount to a plagiarism. So I think it's really very important to understand it in theory, but at the same time, see how you need to apply it into every aspect of our functioning. I mean, when we write up our research or our papers, it becomes very important. At the end of this discussion, I'm actually going to give you an example of a little trouble that I had, and I'll explain to you how inadvertent this can be. So that is on one hand, but at the same time, I think it's important that we understand what constitutes plagiarism, what are guidelines that are existing to avoid plagiarism. And I'm very glad that the organizers of today's program, the organizers of a newly launched journal have actually thought about this as a particular topic. I'm not aware of too many discussions on the topic of plagiarism during the COVID webinars. So it's very exciting to actually see this. And I'm sure we're going to listen to Sandeep Grover next. And I'm sure there's going to be very interesting aspects of it. And I'll just come back, and when I make my concluding remarks, share with you my one personal example of it. Back to you, Geetha.
Thank you, ma'am. It gives me great pleasure to invite Professor Sandeep Grover, because a big thank you for accepting the invitation and at the last minute and being here, and also addressing this important topic. I think Professor Sandeep Grover needs no introduction. He has published extensively on varied areas in psychiatry. He's also been part of many editorial boards, and I think he's the editor of 2 journals that I am aware of, Professor Sandeep. But I think without much delay, I would invite you to go ahead with your presentation.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're.
Yeah. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, Dr. Vijay and Dr. Ranganathan, for inviting me here, and for the chairperson for the kind words. As Dr. Geetha said, that I'm just trying to fit into somebody else's shoes. So let me try to do whatever best I can do for the topic with this short notice. And what I begin my talk with certain disclosures that when I'm presenting this talk, I do not have any conflict of interest. And I'll be using certain images available on the internet to convey the meaning, because I think that sometimes the visual images help us to understand things better than just only having an auditory stimulus. And maybe deliberately, I may be plagiarizing in my presentation. So I will request everybody to point out what I'm plagiarizing, okay, at the end of my talk. So before I go to the topic proper, let's first understand how we are brought up, why things are happening this way. We all are brought up with as a childhood, that we need to study hard so that we perform well. And every parent and every student expects that he should score 100%, not just 100, maybe 101%. And so when we appear in the exams, we score about 90, 95, and we are not satisfied. And we go back to the teacher and ask to have a relook why I have lost my 5% marks. The common response of the teacher is actually, your response is not exactly the same as given in the book. So you need to be ditto. That's where the whole problem starts. And so we start learning to memorize things and just mug up and try to become as exact as it is there in the textbook. So we forget to understand the concept and we just keep on learning to memorize things. And we value people who are able to copy others, isn't it? So that if we look at this small girl, we will say that she is very smart, she's very intelligent, she's adorable, that she's able to copy others. That's where we value actually. Somebody who's not able to copy somebody else better, actually he's not valued maybe. So what we learn actually, we learn copying at the different levels. We use different means to copy, and we try to use as many as tricks we do to copy, and whatever we want to do, where we can go up to any extent to do this unfair means. And at times we all know that we always will be prepared to jump a red light until we are not caught off. And if at all we are caught off, everything is fair till you're not caught up. But if you're caught up, you know that you can pay some fine and get away with it. That's where our mindset is. So summarizing the problem which we have, that at the end of the day, what matters is how much you score, not how you score. And good marks is equal to the ditto answers. And we will do not certain things if we know that these are punishable. But if we think that we can bribe and get away, we will still keep on doing it. That's how our mindset is. That's how we are brought up. And so I would say that we all are brought up actually to plagiarize rather than not to plagiarize. And in academic presentations, while making slides, anything, copy pasting is a rule rather than an exception. And maybe as a teacher, when we supervise a seminar or anything, we don't bother about that the student is referring things properly or not. Is he doing copy paste or not? Has he understood the concept or not? We just think that if he's able to convey certain things on a few slides anywhere, it's fine. And plagiarism is never included in the curriculum prior to we start writing. So that's the problem we all face. So what the topic basically which I have now, how we can prevent this so-called plagiarism, this is where I would like to focus. I've tried to divide my talks under the following headings, and I would like to address one after the other, maybe in any not in a particular sequence. So we actually don't start early. The problem is that as a trainee, whenever we are given a work by our mentor or we are given any academic assignment, when do we usually start? We actually believe in the reverse of Kabir Das' poem that we will do it later. That is, the kal kare so aaj kare converted to aaj kare so kal kare so parso itni bhi kya jaldi hai jeena hai jab barso. So we actually follow the reverse. So we keep on procrastinating things, and we don't start early on time. So we keep on delaying the things time and again, and then at the end, last day, we have a lot of time pressure, and that leads to doing just a copy paste business rather than understanding, because you have to present something to your colleagues or maybe give to your mentor and so forth. So you basically again practice copy paste so that you are able to give something to the mentor or you are able to present something somewhere. So we need to learn that if you start right on the time, things would be easier and copy paste can be avoided. Then, as I've said in my presentation, we are basically not very honest people. That we are not very honest in trying to understand the concept than started writing. We are basically more interested in writing. So what happens there? That when you start doing a copy paste and writing and then give it to your mentor, now it is the job of your mentor to decide how he or she looks at the presentation or the manuscript you have made. And neither the mentor will ask you, or neither you are very open to talking to your mentor about have you done a copy paste or not? So once we don't disclose honestly to my mentor that I've copy pasted this from this source, he or she will not be able to guide you also to do how to paraphrase or how to overcome the plagiarism. So we learn the opportunity to learn how to paraphrase or how to prevent plagiarism is lost. So the second aspect, that's where I say that we need to become very honest first before we start to think about writing. Then this is the common thing which everybody says, avoid copy and paste. But how to do it is something which we never tell our students. So basically whatever we keep on saying that don't do copy paste or don't do these things, ultimately copy paste survives, and that is the rule of the day, rather than we are able to overcome it, because we are not telling our student how to do it. So the basic steps, when we as a mentor or a person who is willing to write things, should first learn to read liberally rather than writing. Read multiple sources, go to the original source, whatever the information is being given, so that you can, as Venkat was saying, that if you go to the original source, you will come to know that there may be certain facts which are actually wrong. So you first make your rough notes, tabulate things so that you can synthesize the information, close your sources, then use your rough notes and the tabulation to write whatever you want to write, read what you have written, and then you may end up comparing with the original concept, original things with respect to both concept and the wording. If you follow these few steps, maybe you'll be able to come out with a better manuscript or a better write-up, and the chances of plagiarism will be lower. I'll just share an example with you. For example, this is a case report which was published by us some time back. Now, it talks about a case report and analysis of similar reports in the literature. So what we basically did, for example, that we did an internet search, we decided about certain columns which information we want, and we have tried to tabulate this now by using the author's sources. But now when it comes to writing the text, I write it here, that a review of case reports on this, suggests that the age range of the patient is this, the doses which has been used as this, and I'm not taking it from any source. I'm presenting my interpretation of the information what I have tabulated. Now, when I'm presenting the information of what I have tabulated, it reduces the chances of plagiarism, because now I'm using my own resources to write, and what resources I've created are basically my notes. And again, I'm not as much as possible, I'm not copying what I have written in that. I'm just synthesizing the information, and I'm trying to synthesize the information for about 15 case reports in maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs. So that helps if you want to, as a mentor or as a person who wants to start writing. This is the simpler thing to learn, that if you, for example, if you try to teach our student how to write a review article or discussion of the thesis, I tell my student that, okay, you go back, make columns for, let's say, this is your primary outcome, the demographic, the clinical profile. Now you start tabulating few studies. For example, tabulate their age, gender distribution, socioeconomic status, and so, and just make tables first. Then you write your own results and then compare with them, which are the findings similar to these studies, which are not similar to these studies, and then you synthesize your result. Tabulation always helps as far as my understanding goes. I would like to listen from others, how they approach things. Now, coming to the issue of citation, because this is another thing which everyone talks about, that if you want to avoid plagiarism, maybe just citation may be sufficient. But you need to understand that citation should be done properly and as liberally as you can do. If you have written someone's ideas in your own word also, that does not mean that you do not need to cite. That's something which we need to understand, that we are talking about paraphrasing, which I'll also come later on. But we need to understand that although we are paraphrasing, the reference has to be there. And the simpler way to decide about whether to cite or not, that if you think this is not your own idea, and if you did not think about it and it's not in a common knowledge, it's always better to cite, quote, and paraphrase. So we just try to understand what are these other two components of it. And in today's world, citation is more or less becoming easier for the younger generation. Maybe for some older generation, to make a reference list is a very difficult job. But for the newer generation, now you have online so-called software which can keep a track of your resources, and while you're tabulating and making your rough notes, you can always keep on putting your source material there. So the reference list is actually generated on its own. And you can use multiple citation software while you're writing, like the EndNote or the reference manager and so forth. So these will help you in improving your citations also, and attributing things properly to the person who has generated the idea. And as Venkat was again saying, I'll just try to emphasize that fact that when you're writing the so-called background information or literature survey, rather than citing the review articles, it's always better to go to the original sources. Now, coming to the issue of paraphrasing, this is something which, again, everybody talks about, and we think that this is a solution to plagiarism. So what we need to understand, what is paraphrasing? Paraphrasing is simply that taking a set of facts or opinion by somebody and rewording them in your own words. So the basic aim is to preserve the meaning, but don't preserve the words. So that's the basic aim. And so you are writing the somebody's original idea in your own words. Now, if it's a passage which is borrowed from some other source and is rewritten by you, you can always say that you have paraphrased the original author's idea. And if you look at this example again, that how you paraphrase, if you look at these two texts, possibly they convey the similar meaning, but the text has been paraphrased in such a way that somebody can say that the meaning has been preserved, although the words have been changed. So how do we need to paraphrase, or how do we learn doing that? That you need to learn to read the original text till you understand it properly. Then you write the same without looking at the original text. Then compare the original text and your written text. Use quotations for exactly borrowed phrases or sentences, and always cite the new text. I think if you remember these 4 or 5 principles, I think paraphrasing will then start working. Now, if the other way to understand that, for example, if all of you would have seen this image in many presentations, that Yedil Divana, and you say Divana hai Yedil. Now, you have just changed the sequence of the word, and what Venkat was referring to as paraphrasing plagiarism or mosaic plagiarism. These are the kind of things which are the sources. Now, the most important thing for paraphrasing is first learning to improve your vocabulary. Unless you don't have a good vocabulary, you will not be able to paraphrase also, because your vocabulary is very limited. So accordingly, you're going to use the words. So somebody who is a good writer has to be a good reader. That's what basically I would recommend. And when you're paraphrasing, the common thing is that you open a Word file, then you open the PDF file, you copy from PDF and put it in the Word, and then you try to paraphrase. I think that's a very, very wrong practice. I think that needs to be avoided, that you preferably try to read, close the original source, and then write, and then maybe compare that. That's what we need to practice. And preferably when you're writing, if you learn how to write in short sentences, you'll be able to overcome a lot of plagiarism, and paraphrasing will be becoming more easier. And if somebody is not able to do it, as we know, the technology is able to do it for you. So we have now paraphrasing softwares for people. Now the plagiarism is actually going to become more or less, the time will tell. Now you have softwares which can paraphrase for you. So you can choose those software and you can just reword things, whatever. And I think these are going to actually lead to more plagiarism, and those who just want to publish, this will become something like the best opportunity for them by using these softwares. Now coming to the quote, how do we quote? So the simpler thing is that what is quotation? Quoting, that when you put the information, whatever you're trying to write, in the inverted comma, that is known as a quote. And when do we need to quote? That's where we need to understand. When we are trying to use the exact words of the source, which is important. And when you think that the original language is particularly vivid and expressive, and you possibly will not be able to change it anything, or you want to use the same words for technical accuracy. And when the words have been used by somebody in the authority position, and using the actual name of XYZ actually can provide weightage to your argument, maybe that's where you should prefer to quote. And when the simpler example for quoting is something like a definition or a diagnostic criteria, and how do you quote? The better is that name the source in the introductory phase, use quotation marks or the indent long quotations, and cite the source appropriately. For example, I'm just trying to show you that I start the sentence with DSM-5 definition of XYZ is so and so, and it's put in the inverted commas. That's where you need to learn when to quote. And if you try to just again understand that this is the text and here is the reference, you have put it in the inverted comma, given the reference, this is not plagiarism. But if you're using the same text, you're not putting quotation mark, this is plagiarism. And if you're not using the reference, it is still plagiarism. And if you rephrase it and still not put the reference, it is still plagiarism. So you need to understand this. These four important things, how you need to distinguish that where the students are committing mistakes. Now, checking the copyright issue, because this is something which I think in another similar series of the talks will be discussed. I'll just try to have just 2 slides on this, that we need to understand that most of the journals are published under different kind of licenses, and the most commonly used license is CC BY NC SA, and that basically makes us to understand the CC is copying, but when you're copying somebody, by that you are giving the reference, that is the author you are attributing to him, and NCs that you're copying and doing this for non-commercial purposes, and that is the share alike, that is SA, that when you are doing all this, you are also publishing in a place which also has similar kind of copyright issue. So this is where you need to understand this CC BY NC SA when you're trying to, let's say, adapt something or use somebody's table or something. You need to understand where you can do it, where you cannot do it, but still you need to remember having an permission is always better from the original sources when you're trying to use somebody else's text. Now, coming to the use of plagiarism softwares. Most of us will feel that why the similarity index cannot be actually given, that we should be given grades for that. As I started my talk in the beginning, that initially, my teacher has taught me that I should have as much similarity as possible. So there are a lot of plagiarism softwares now available. You can use anything, paid, unpaid, and you can get your manuscript checked. Again, there is a simple talk coming in maybe by Avinash tomorrow, so I'm not going much into that. And what as trainees or mentors, we need to understand that students often try to fool the plagiarism software. As teachers, many times we don't pay heed to that, and students will come and they will say that they've got the plagiarism check done, it's 10%. So you think, okay, is everything fine? That is where the whole problem starts. Because students have developed, and you go to YouTube, there are so many videos and methods being told there how you can fool the plagiarism software. So we need to understand that these softwares are not 100%. When, for example, somebody comes to you for thesis submission and everything, it is better that you take the thesis from the student, you send it for plagiarism check. But what students will do is use somewhere inverted comma, club 2 words or something like that, or change the one spelling of one word, and they will fool the software. So actually they are not fooling somebody else, but they are fooling yourself, and you will at the end get caught at the later stage. For example, if I try to summarize my talk, that you start late in writing the protocol and you don't check the plagiarism before you go to your mentor, and mentor approves the draft, and there where the whole dilemma starts, that you don't feel like changing or disclosing to your mentor. So you end up manipulating the plagiarism software, and now you have plagiarized protocol with you. Now you are going to convert the plagiarized protocol to your final thesis, and the final thesis, somebody will try to convert that to a paper, and the paper will get rejected or retracted because of the plagiarism. So we need to understand this cycle, and as authors and as so-called mentors, we need to look at this slippery slope. Now, coming to the mentorship. The role of mentor is always contribute to the growth of our students, and that is where we need to take our role very seriously. And we should be mentors and not just authorship grabbers. When I say this, I have to stay with full understanding what I am telling for myself and my colleagues, that we need to teach our students how to write for academic papers and everything, and should inculcate a thing in them that they should write for science rather than writing for academic positions. Once you start writing for science, the academic positions will actually follow. And as mentors, if we do not have time, we should not accept any invitation to write something. What happens is that when we don't have time, we accept the invitation, then ask one of our students, somebody else to write for us, and then we could become the first author, he becomes the second author, she becomes the second author, and the paper is sent. You also don't have time to check, so the plagiarized manuscript starts in the market. So we need to teach our students about the publication ethics. That's where the whole things will start improving. So we need to be good role models, and we need to not give work to the colleagues with short completion dates. That's the other problem, which many times we end up as faculty doing that. Always use software to check plagiarism and have time to supervise, and preferably write yourself rather than just asking your students to write, and with this in mind that no, I'm teaching you, so you write the draft, I will see it. I don't believe that in 100%. So I always prefer to start writing the draft myself, and maybe at times tell my student, now you improve on this. And always try to verify whatever has been written. And if your student comes and he says that this is plagiarized and I'm not able to improve, respect the honesty rather than shouting at him. And we need to understand that the mentor-mentee relationship is control R. That is, if you do a control R, it is a full right alignment. So it has a lot of C's. I am not just going to read everything here, but if you, as a student, what you need to understand, what a mentor looks from you is the basic trust, confidence. That if he can trust you, you will see that you're going to grow with your mentor. But if you lose the trust of your mentor, and if you try to again have too many mentors, maybe many people don't prefer, and that's where you lose in your academic career. And always read your draft, give your draft to your colleagues to read, and maybe before you submit, sleep over it for some time, read it again before submitting. That will again help you. And so if you want to understand plagiarism, whenever you're writing something, just try to understand, am I using my own words? If it is, answer is yes. Is this my own idea? Yes, then this is not plagiarism. But otherwise, if you are quoting and if you are using somebody else's ideas or word, learn to quote and paraphrase. Just to conclude, we need to understand what constitutes and what does not constitute plagiarism. We need to check the rules regarding the copyright, learn to cite references properly, learn to paraphrase, read, review. That's something which we need to learn, and take the help of our mentors. And this is what I say is M2V. That is, that will actually inculcate writing skills and avoid plagiarism. And so if you want to build your curriculum YT without the control and V, that would be the great thing rather than relying on C and V. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sandeep Grover. I think it is very interesting that you've not only addressed the roots of plagiarism. How does it, it just doesn't start when you're doing your post-graduation or after that. We just started from a very young age, and how we can also, it's just not about plagiarism software that's the solution, but in terms of how to avoid plagiarism, how to inculcate certain writing habits. I think you've really highlighted very, very important points. So now I think we've completed 2 talks. So this is the time for Q&A. So anybody having any questions, clarifications related to the 2 presentations, or else please do either you can put it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
So what is the best software to detect this?
At present, we are relying on Authenticate. So Authenticate, that is where my institute relies on. Most of the journal publishers are also recommending that, which is a paid software, which can be used if you want to use it.
Dr. Venkat,
how about Turnitin software?
Many people do use that, and that is also, I think, equally well, but I have no experience of using it. Maybe Venkat can add.
Yeah.
Yeah. We use Turnitin as NIMHANS. I think Turnitin is also good. Turnitin is also good, which I would say is comparable with Authenticate. Because Authenticate is something which I am familiar with in the journal processing interface, whereas Turnitin is something which we use in our institute. I concur with Dr. Grover in terms of both the softwares. Yeah. Thank you.
What is the percentage to be fixed to?
Okay,
Dr. Sandeep sir, what is the percentage?
Okay. In general, for student thesis and everything, usual percentage, again, if you're using a very good software, again, not something unpaid software, is maximum of 15%, but ideally less than 10%. Ideally, it should be less than 10%.
So does it vary from software to software, this percentage?
Yeah, that's where I'm saying that it will vary from software to software. That's why I'm saying use one of the best software. And in that, if you're able to achieve less than 10%, that is the ideal thing. Because ultimately, when you're submitting to the journal, they're going to use the best software. And if you get caught there, what happens is that it's not that your manuscript gets rejected. Maybe you are blacklisted, and whenever you submit manuscript in future, they just reject. They don't look at your manuscript also. Let me be very honest.
That's why I'm asking. Because
Dr. Balraj, we have a session. Dr. Balraj, we have a session on plagiarism software. The next session is on that. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Dr. Grover?
Yes,
Dr. Sandeep.
Yeah.
So, when do you suspect your student or your trainee has been doing this, and how will you pick up and how will you address this, basically?
See, I make it very simpler for my students that whenever I'm, let's say, asking them to write a draft or their thesis or protocol, I first call them and tell them the basic rules. Be honest, whatever you have done. Rest is my job. If you are not able to do something properly, you don't have the skills, I will do it for you. We will sit down and see how we can improve on it. But if you become dishonest, then it's a problem for you and me. So if you develop that kind of a relationship with your student, that they can honestly come and disclose what they have done, that I've just copy pasted in slides or just copy pasted the article for you, it becomes very easy. And before you start seeing any manuscript, for example, if a student of mine gives me a paper that, sir, I've written this paper, you can have a look, I first send it for plagiarism before I start seeing it, because it becomes something problematic for me that once I have seen, I have modified it, and then plagiarism is done and it's still more than that, I feel that I have been also dishonest, that I have not supervised my student properly. So always anything comes to me, it first goes for plagiarism, then I start editing them. So I would leave it at that. Honesty is something which needs to be worked upon, and maybe you need to tell your students that you have time to do everything for them. That until as you say that you have time constraints, you cannot see, you do it, it's your thesis, it's your job, that is where the whole problem starts. I think that's the attitude of many faculty at many places. That is where I'll be bluntly saying that.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Yes.
I have one question.
Geetha, I'm Dr. Prasad Rao.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Your volume is low, sir.
Pratima Murthy's examples. Pratima comments.
Sir, your tone is very low. Can you increase the volume?
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, please go.
I was saying that I was anxiously waiting for Pratima's examples. And of course, both wonderful talks, Sandeep and Venkat as usual. But I thought I'm just waiting for the final, you can say, the beautiful covering of today's topics.
Ma'am, would you like
one question?
Yeah. Madam, there are two questions before that in the chat box. Rangnath, can you take up those questions?
Yeah, there is...
I have one question, sir, if I can put across. suppose a researcher has very large data to be analyzed and is unable to put it across in a single article owing to the limitation of words provided. Say some provide 3,000, 3,500, 4,000, or max 5,000 in some amateur journals. So if the data cannot be fit in the one single article, and if he divides into 2 or a max of 3 and tries to put different variables or profiles in different 2 or 3 articles, can it be said as a plagiarism?
Okay, Dr. Venkat, should I take it?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. So what you need to understand that if you you have a large base of database and you're trying to write more than one paper from the same database, you need to just be cautious about few things. Number one, each paper is highlighting at a different aspect of the research. Number one. And when you're writing your first paper, you can always write that this research is from a larger database, which is covering all this. And in this paper, I am focusing. And so that you make a case that multiple papers are going to come out of this thesis or this work. And sometime when then you're writing the second paper, again, you can refer to your first paper that this is what this database has been published, this part has been published, and this paper now focuses on this part. But it's also something known as salami publication, that just for the heck of it, that you want to have multiple publications from one research project, don't divide the data. If you can fit the data into as small number of papers as possible, try to do that. Otherwise, what I've suggested can be done. But remember that you should not be doing deliberately salami publications.
There are 2 comments, I think. One from Prof.
If I quote my own reference and send it for the journal, do I need to hide my reference? Because if I disclose my reference, it's in the details of socio-demographic details are available in the previous publication or something like that, and I quote my own reference there. It will be revealing my identity.
Okay. The simpler thing to understand that if the journal is following a single blind reviewing process, that you don't need to bother about it. Some journals take the author names directly and they disclose that to the reviewers who is the author. In that kind of a journal, you have no issues there. You need to remember that if it's a single blinded journal. Okay. Now it's a double blinded journal, they will give you certain instructions, right? For example, don't disclose the identity of the institute or hide the reference. That you can hide the reference of your own there. Okay. Some of the journals like I'm involved with, they will say that, okay, you say that the trial has been registered in CTRI, but don't give the citation, CTRI citation at the beginning to hide the identity. So you need to read the instructions. Journal, those who follow double blind will have their own instructions and try to follow that.
I think there are a couple of questions in the chat box. Dr. Venkat, first question is on, I think Dr. Vijay has put in questions. Comment on plagiarism of flowcharts and tables in review articles. How are these detected and how to avoid plagiarism and extending a previous flowchart? That's the first question.
Yeah, that's come from Dr. Swarana Buddha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We actually they pick up these things because especially if it is a text which is there in the table, the previous publication. So number one, how to avoid plagiarism and extending a previous flowchart. I think it is related to the second question that is asked in terms of how to use the charts and other figures that are published.
Yes.
The journal guidelines give very clear instructions in the sense like we need to write to the earlier copyright holders. Most often it will be the publishers, and then get their approval and use it. Suppose if we want to adapt that particular previous figure or a flowchart, again we have to write and get the permission. So journals often, the third question is, journals often put a restriction on the number of references. Does this not affect plagiarism? For example, it is easier to cite a review than the original studies. This is a very relevant point. A way out would be that, of course, what Dr. Grover mentioned, I think we need to ensure our vocabulary in such a way that we are able to communicate the critical info in lesser number of words and focus on pertinent references. Suppose if it is still not possible to account within that particular limited number, we can always provide what are called as supplementary materials in which this could be added, because most of the journals now have e-supplementary material in which additional resources can be included in the publication. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Dr. Sandeep, there are 3 more questions I just wanted you to have a look. One is about, can plagiarism of ideas be detected by softwares of semantics? I'm not sure what it reads, but can the ideas be detected? That's what it means.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I will just, this is Buddha, ma'am.
Yes, Varna. Yeah.
That Venkat sir had told that that is also a type of plagiarism. So if the similarity index is not detected by semantics or texts, can the idea be detected? Do we have those softwares?
Dr. Sandeep?
Yeah. See, we need to understand that at present, to best of my knowledge, we do not have the ideas that if you have reworded it, that can be picked up. But you need to understand that once you are writing on a particular topic, suppose I'm writing on, let's say, schizophrenia or clozapine or something, there are many people following those publications. So as soon as you pick up somebody's ideas and try to give it, he will immediately complain. So you need to understand that for every research, there are a group of core authors who work in that area and they follow research done by others. So those who are authorities in those areas, they have somehow they know that their ideas are being copied or not copied, and whether these are, if they are copied, are they cited properly or not. So we need to understand that. See, when we talk about a replication studies, basically replication studies are copying the idea, but you need to definitely mention the original source. That this is the previous studies have been done in this area by Dr. Venkat, but this has been done in South India, no study from North India. So we like to replicate this study in North India. So that's how I would try to put the information and then I write.
Right.
Yeah. I think the next question is very interesting. And how much of information can be copy pasted as a quote? Because sometimes I've seen that this is taken in a very simple way, and people even paste the abstract. So how much of information can be copy pasted as a quote?
See, that's what I said, that when you're trying to quote definitions or some, let's say, diagnostic criteria or something, you have to first decide whether, like, for example, you're writing a paper on depression and you want to copy paste all the depression criteria. Is that required or not? If that is not required, just don't need to do the copy pasting. Don't need to put it in the code. Somebody can go there and or know that. You need to know that your readers are experts. Many times what happens is that we think that reader does not know what is depression, and that's how we start writing, like we write in our thesis. So we tried writing papers in the similar way, we put too much of information in the code. So actually, there is no limit to particular quotation, but we need to understand, try to quote the limited amount of information as less as possible. So the upper limit is 10%, but if you quote, the software is going to pick up that quotation also. That is where the so-called, as an author, as an editor, or as a reviewer, you are going to override that.
Okay, I think we are reaching the end of the session. I
think there is one question which I like to answer, if Geetha, if you allow me.
Okay, I think we can take the last one. Yeah.
Somebody asked that the onus of checking plagiarism lies with whom? I think it is with the authors. The first person who is going to be blamed is the author, not the editor, not the reviewer. So let's be very clear about this. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sandeep and Dr. Venkat. I think it's been a very, very useful session. Now I request the chairperson, Professor Pratima, to give the concluding remarks with the anecdote.
Thank you, Geetha, and thank you, Rangnath, Vijay, Som, everybody else who's been involved for asking me to chair this very interesting session. I only, as I mentioned, caught the fag end of Venkat's presentation, which is always very illuminating, and Sandeep's, of course, with all its illustrations was extremely interesting again. So, I mean, I think in this day, again, I mean, perhaps in India, this has become more topical now, but this is something that's been several decades old, this whole thing of adage of publish or perish. And I think there's a lot of pressure on people to write. So much so that it's taken away the joy of reviewing something, the excitement of, writing on your own, because that itself, I mean, it's amazing, the whole process that goes in. And Sandeep alluded to some of these processes that you need to do. You need to make tables, you need to understand the data, you need to interpret it, and then you need to write. If those processes are in any way short-circuited, the chances of it turning out, in this kind of a situation is very high. Very often when I read the first few lines of a thesis, and I'm sure Matthew will agree with me, you immediately know that this is not something that your resident is capable of writing. And then it's very easy to catch, the places where appropriate quotations have not been made, appropriate references have not been made. So it's really very easy to catch that. I really want to emphasize the copy and paste part of it, because it's tempting. It's so tempting for all of us to copy and paste, especially now that, you have two screens very often. You're reading an article on one screen, you're working on the other screen. So it's very tempting, and that inadvertently can lead to a situation where plagiarism is likely to occur. The third thing is that many of us are not very fluent in the grammatical aspects of English. And therefore, I think we feel a little insecure using our own language, and therefore we tend to pick up language that has already been used. And that's another danger of thing. Now, you all mentioned, I think there were some discussions about the amount, which software to use and how to pick it up. I understand that different agencies, for example, the UGC has different criteria of what constitutes plagiarism. Various institutions have what constitutes plagiarism. And sometimes the repetition of certain words, including technical words, shows up as plagiarism. So very often, I do know that with our students, for example, once they've done a first plagiarism check, they need to sit down and make sure that certain words and the phrases which are innocuous, they're not copied from anywhere, but when they get repeated, they need to be excluded when a plagiarism check is done. And that's a very genuine problem that people have. Synthesis is the most difficult art that students need to learn. And it's the inability to synthesize that very often leads people who are writing to take chunks from somewhere else. So if you learn to synthesize, you can avoid your, the inverted commas, the quotations, or indeed the thing. Self-plagiarism is another thing that, is actually a very, very funny thing, because sometimes you feel that it's somewhere along the line, a matter of showing off when you quote yourself, and therefore you kind of understate and say it's my own thing. But it's equally important not to, self-plagiarize, and that's something I've always found a little difficult, to keep quoting yourself. And Rangnath mentioned what happens, in a thing where there is no disclosure of authors, that this can be an issue. The other problem that I have is subsequently when you're a co-author and there is a large number of authors and somebody's in a great hurry to get, because they need to get the publication because of their promotion or because of some other pressures, there's a great hurry and time is not given for you to go through. And that is my nightmare, because very often you haven't read it completely. So you have to have, if you don't have the time to read the entire article, don't be a co-author, or have somebody who will read it word to word and make sure that there is no scope for plagiarism. But that is a dread. As you grow and more senior, that is something that you need to watch out. because it's very tempting to be on a publication with a large list of authors. You've contributed at some stage, but you have a responsibility right up to the end to make sure that there is no plagiarism. Figures and diagrams particularly are also something that people talked about. And I think there, as Venkat mentioned, getting the permission to reproduce, to adapt, etc., is very critical. I'll tell you of this last anecdote, and this is quite bizarre. And it also tells you that when you work with a new set of people, how careful you need to be. Now, this was an invitation extended to me by a group. I'll not mention the details too much. I will not have too much disclosure. But somebody connected me with a group of authors who were working on lifestyle disorders. And again, more for the sake of learning, I agreed to be part of this. And in these very large projects, there are possibly scores of people who are working on the papers, including research students, young researchers, etc., etc. So I got sent a draft, which I was asked to work, which I was given as a background document. Now, without clarifying, and I believe that was my fault, without clarifying, I thought that this was a prepared draft, and I worked on that draft, and then I submitted it. I subsequently got an email saying that on their check, they found that it exceeded the plagiarism index. Now, this is the first time something like that had happened, and it was quite a shock to me. And then I wrote back and said, this is this issue. I was given this particular section. I was not aware that this was actually just excerpted from different places. I therefore, worked on this particular draft. This was, made available to me by a young research student, perhaps. And the senior person had told me that this had been the work of that particular research student who put this all together. And then I explained my situation and said, I wasn't aware of this. And if I had known that this represented unoriginal material, that I would withdraw the article. Anyway, they told me subsequently that they clarified the whole thing, that they understand that this is a genuine mistake. But then I consulted a couple of people, and I realized that there was a responsibility all around. Because of the miscommunication, there was actually a chance that, this might have constituted plagiarism. So I very gracefully withdrew from this entire group and declined to participate in this process, although I had actually contributed quite significantly. What it tells you is that at every level, you need to be extremely careful that you are not getting drawn into a situation where whatever you contribute, whatever you write, is possibly of doubtful content and might represent plagiarism. As Sandeep said, any kind of error, even if it is not an intended error, can get you into serious difficulties in terms of, your article, not only your article being turned down, but people refusing to publish what you have. And finally, the reputation, which is very, very important for all of us. So in the enthusiasm to kind of publish and get more and more, research publications out, one must not, overstep. So at one level, it is how to avoid plagiarism, how to mentor your students to make sure that what they write is original and they go through the different paces of writing and enjoying their work. But at the other, it is that at any phase in your career, you can have these problems. So you have to be very mindful of it and careful to avoid it. So read, reread, check, recheck, do it as many times that you need to do before you are satisfied with the manuscript and allow it to go forward, especially when there are pressures from your co-authors, from maybe the journal saying that you need to send something back in a couple of weeks' time. In spite of all these time pressures, be careful. I'm almost talking to myself when I'm saying this, because these are very common problems. I just end with saying it's not only plagiarism, it is also any other kind of what is perceived as scientific dishonesty that comes into the news. I don't know if all of you are aware of some of the ICMR articles being, some things that were done 20, 25 years ago, being again pulled into public scrutiny, because there are actually professionals who are doing this to detect any kind of fraud, including plagiarism. So I think at least, because as Sandeep said, even if it's not your own personal honesty, it is because the cops are checking each vehicle that you need to be careful. A fantastic couple of presentations, and I'm sure tomorrow will be very exciting as well. Thank you very much, Geetha, and back to you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I now ask Dr. Ranganath to tell us about tomorrow's session, informal, and then we can wind up.
Just 1 second, with Madam's inputs. How long we need to store our data for future scrutiny?
Sandeep, are you going to respond to that?
Yeah. Usually, we need to understand that the drug trials require to preserve your data for at least 10 to 15 years if you are a part of any drug trial. However, when you are trying to, now with the today's world, like that, now we are trying to develop repositories that you have to deposit your original data that anybody can analyze. Now it is becoming eternal, I would say that. Once it goes to repository, it will be there forever. So now we are in that transition phase. Maybe after a decade or so, any original paper any author has to make this sure that he deposits his data for anybody to analyze.
Rangnath, that reminds me again of a very amusing anecdote. I mean, amusing for us, but it must have been terrible for the person who wrote it. And this was a very well-known group of authors who wrote on public health. And then when they were asked for the data, they said that the rats chewed up my original papers. And, this was a terrible thing to do. Fortunately, with electronic data and, of course, with these kind of resources, that doesn't happen. But you better keep your data somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, madam. Just we come to the concluding part of our today's part 1 of the webinar series on plagiarism in research. I would like to invite all for tomorrow's part second part of this plagiarism issues in research, where we'll be addressing various plagiarism softwares, both paid and unpaid, by Dr. Matthew Varghese sir, and how to interpretation of similarity index, how to reduce it, how to address the trivial issues under similarity index by Dr. Avinash D'Souza, current editor-in-chief of IPS Western Zone Journal, Annals of Indian Psychiatry. So I request all to join tomorrow evening for the second part of this webinar series. Third part of this webinar series, we'll be posting it on 10th of March 2022, same time, 7:30 to 8:45 p.m. Indian Standard Time, where Dr. Suresh Badambat will be addressing on ethical and legal issues concerning with plagiarism issues. Thank you, all. I hand over to Dr. Somshikar Vijay for a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Rangnath. It was very fantastic presentations by both eminent and stalwart speakers, my teacher, Dr. Venkatsubramanian sir, and Dr. Sandeep Grover sir. So on behalf of Indian Psychiatric Society Karnataka chapter, I thank both the speakers, sir. Thank you, Dr. Venkat sir and Dr. Sandeep sir. And also I thank the chairperson of today's session, Dr. Pratima Murthy, my teacher and director of the NIMHANS. Thank you, madam. And also I thank my teacher, Dr. Geetha Desai, for moderating this session. And I thank my president, Dr. Kiran Kumar, and my special thanks to our editor-in-chief, Dr. Vijay Harbishettar, who has, it is his brainchild. And I thank Dr. Ranganath Kulkarni, who coordinated with everybody in a short notice period and made it successful event. Thank you, Dr. Vijay and Dr. Ranganath. And I also thank all the participants, especially my special thanks to Dr. Prasad Rao and Dr. Sai Krishna, and many other seniors were there. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, one and all. Dr. Matthew Varghese, he will be there with us tomorrow. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Thank you very much. And thank you, one and all. With this, with the permission of the President, I like to close this session. Thank you, one and all, and good night to everyone.
Good night.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Good night.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.